Most people are raised to believe wars are fought over ideology, borders, or moral principles. They are told it is about freedom, democracy, or national security. That explanation sounds clean and respectable. But history reveals a colder reality. The true battlefield has always been money. More precisely, who controls the currency the world is compelled to use. And once that pattern becomes clear, the past 50 years of global conflict stop appearing accidental and begin to look structured. What I am about to explain is not a conspiracy. It is a recurring framework. And right now, that framework is under pressure again. Stay with me, because this is how empires protect their currency, until the moment they cannot anymore. My name is Marcus Blackwell. I am not a financial advisor, but I study financial systems through the cycles and patterns history leaves behind, the ones most people only recognize when it is far too late. My purpose is simple: to show you what is approaching before it becomes unavoidable, and to help you remain financially resilient in a world growing more unstable by the day. I do not dramatize the future. I reveal its structure. Because once you understand how this system actually works, the uncertainty you feel finally makes sense. These pressures are not personal shortcomings. They are indicators of a repeating cycle. If you want to stay ahead of it, subscribe and follow along. To understand where we are now, we must rewind. In 1971, the United States quietly ended the gold backing of the dollar. Overnight, the dollar transformed into something fundamentally different. No longer tied to metal, no longer limited by physical scarcity, it became a promise supported by trust and power. By every historical precedent, this should have ended the dollar's dominance. Every fiat currency before it ultimately failed. Rome, France, Weimar Germany, all followed the same trajectory. Yet the dollar did not collapse. Instead, it expanded. Why? Because within just a few years, a new anchor replaced gold: oil. In the mid-1970s, a strategic agreement was made with Saudi Arabia. Oil would be sold exclusively in United States dollars. In return, the United States would provide military protection, weapons, and political support. That single agreement reshaped global finance permanently. Every nation on Earth now needed dollars to purchase energy, not because the dollar was neutral or fair, but because survival required it. This was not free market economics. It was enforced. And it worked remarkably well. As long as oil moved through dollars, the United States could run deficits, expand debt, and create currency without immediate collapse. The military protected the currency, and the currency financed the military. That feedback loop is how empires function. But it only holds as long as no one seriously challenges it. In the year 2000, something unexpected occurred. Iraq announced it would begin selling oil in euros instead of dollars. It was a technical decision, largely ignored by the public. 3 years later, Iraq was invaded. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. But one thing shifted almost immediately. Iraqi oil returned to dollar pricing. Most people call that coincidence. History does not. Nearly a decade later, Libya proposed something even more disruptive. Muammar Gaddafi suggested a gold-backed African currency that could be used to trade oil across the continent without dollars. That would have reduced reliance on Western financial systems entirely. 2 years later, NATO intervened. Gaddafi was killed. The currency plan disappeared. Libyan oil returned to dollars. Another coincidence, according to headlines. Another pattern, according to history. This is where discomfort sets in, because the moment you recognize this structure, you begin seeing it everywhere. Iran attempts to sell oil outside the dollar system. Sanctions follow. Russia demands alternative settlement terms for energy. Financial pressure escalates. Syria discusses pipeline routes that bypass dollar-aligned interests. Conflict intensifies. Different nations, different cultures, same financial result. I am not judging these governments. That is not the point. The point is what happens when any nation threatens the monetary infrastructure supporting the global order. Reserve currency status is not symbolic. It is power. It allows a nation to consume more than it produces, to finance wars cheaply, and to export inflation abroad. Lose that status, and everything changes. Now let us bring this into the present, because this is no longer just history. It is unfolding in real time. Venezuela holds some of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. For years, it has been economically isolated, sanctioned, and financially constrained. Recently, Venezuela's state oil company suffered a major cyber attack that disrupted export administration and internal systems. Officials blamed foreign interference. Analysts pointed to ransomware and digital warfare. Either way, the outcome was the same. Oil logistics were disrupted. Data systems went offline. Exports slowed. This matters far more than most people realize. Modern financial conflict no longer requires bombs. It requires keyboards. If you can disrupt energy flows, you can apply pressure without firing a shot. Cyber operations against oil infrastructure are not accidents. They are a new layer of economic enforcement, and they are increasing. At the same time, the global system is shifting. China has built alternative trade routes. Russia and China settle energy transactions outside the dollar. BRICS nations openly discuss reducing reliance on United States currency. Saudi Arabia has publicly acknowledged openness to accepting non-dollar payments. These are not ideological gestures. They are risk management decisions. They reflect a world preparing for a multipolar currency system. This is the part nobody talks about. The dollar does not lose reserve status suddenly. It erodes. First slowly, then unevenly, then all at once. The British pound followed this exact path. For nearly 200 years, it was the world's reserve currency. After World War II, Britain lost that position. Within decades, the empire dissolved. The military shrank. Living standards adjusted downward. Not because Britain weakened culturally, but because it lost monetary privilege. What I am saying is simple but profound. Watch what happens when any nation threatens the petrodollar system. It immediately alters the political and economic rules they live under. This pattern is not subtle once you know where to look. One of the clearest demonstrations of this power is the SWIFT global payment network, which most people assume is neutral financial infrastructure for bank communications. In reality, it has become a strategic geopolitical tool. When authorities cut a country's banks off from SWIFT, that nation effectively loses access to global trade because it cannot send or receive payments efficiently with other banks. Without access, the normal flow of exports, imports, finance, and foreign exchange slows dramatically. SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, connects more than 11,000 banks and financial institutions across over 200 countries. That is most of the world's formal financial system. It transmits the instructions that make cross-border payments possible. Disconnect from SWIFT, and you are not merely inconvenienced. You are structurally isolated from the international settlement system. In Iran's case, removal from SWIFT during recent sanctions severely restricted its ability to export goods and receive payment, squeezing its economy and complicating trade. That is why analysts describe SWIFT sanctions as one of the most effective economic levers in modern diplomacy, sometimes called a financial nuclear weapon for the damage it can cause. Russia felt this force as well. After its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, several Russian banks were removed from SWIFT, impairing trade through traditional channels and forcing Moscow to develop its own messaging system, the SPFS. Even that effort faced warnings and threats of further sanctions, making participation risky for other institutions. And it is not only Russia and Iran. Venezuela and Cuba have also faced sanctions that include financial restrictions and access limitations. In Venezuela's case, even as it tries to export oil and recover economically, recent sanctions targeted logistics and trade entities, another form of leverage that further isolates the country financially. These actions push nations into non-dollar trade settlements or alternative channels, sending ripples through global markets. They do not teach this in school because it is uncomfortable. Young people are taught that armies are deployed for freedom or humanitarian reasons. But the language used in policy documents and diplomatic cables is different. It speaks of maintaining dollar liquidity in global energy markets and ensuring the continued flow of petrodollars. That is not abstract theory. It is a real policy. And the fact that countries can lose access to SWIFT, effectively being locked out of lawful global trade, shows how powerful financial infrastructure has become as a weapon of modern geopolitics. Once you see this pattern, you view every major economic conflict through a different lens. Not just politics or ideology, but currency power and access to global systems. Ray Dalio has explained this cycle repeatedly. Late-stage empires share the same symptoms: rising debt, currency debasement, military overreach, social division, external challengers building alternatives. We are checking every box. Now here is the brutal truth. When the dollar eventually loses its monopoly over global energy trade, the ability to print without consequence disappears. Debt becomes more expensive. Inflation becomes harder to control. The military footprint contracts. The political narrative shifts. This does not collapse overnight. It declines through pressure. And this is where fear turns into clarity, because understanding this gives you agency. Most people experience economic stress as personal failure. Rising prices, shrinking savings, unaffordable housing. They blame themselves. They are wrong. These are systemic outcomes of a late-cycle monetary order. So what do? First, you diversify away from single points of failure. That means understanding where your money actually sits. Not just accounts, but exposure. Currency exposure. Counterparty risk. Second, you educate yourself. Financial literacy is not optional in periods like this. It is survival. Third, you reduce unnecessary debt. Debt is manageable in stable systems. It is dangerous in unstable ones. Fourth, you consider real assets. Assets that do not depend entirely on digital permission or financial intermediaries. This is not about panic. This is about preparation. The people who survive transitions are not the loudest. They are the quietest. They position early. They remain adaptable. They do not wait for confirmation from headlines. Here is where it becomes uncomfortable again. Wars are sold with language: freedom, security, stability. But policy documents speak in different terms. Energy access, currency liquidity, trade settlement. These are not emotional concepts. They are structural ones. Currency funds the military. The military enforces currency dominance. That is how empires function. Always have. I am not anti-military. I am anti-illusion. If people are asked to fight, the public deserves honesty about why. Because once you understand the monetary layer beneath conflict, outcomes stop being surprising. This system is under strain. You can feel it. Supply chains, energy prices, digital attacks, financial fragmentation. These are not isolated events. They are symptoms of a transition already underway. What many people still do not realize is that powerful nations are quietly preparing alternatives. They are not trying to overthrow the system overnight. They are building exit ramps away from dollar dependence. This matters because reserve currency status is never permanent. History shows that clearly. And when that status fades, the rules change quickly. When the dollar eventually loses its dominant role in global trade, not if, but when, the privilege of printing without immediate consequences disappears. Inflation can no longer be exported. Debt grows heavier. Options become limited. And when the financial foundation weakens, the military footprint follows. Empires do not retreat because they choose to. They retreat because they can no longer afford the same scale of power projection. This is not cynicism. This is financial history repeating itself. The Dutch learned it. The British learned it. Every reserve currency holder before them learned it the same way. Every major conflict in modern history carried a currency dimension beneath the surface, if you knew where to look. Public messaging speaks of freedom and democracy. That is persuasion. Policy language is colder and more precise. It discusses maintaining dollar liquidity, protecting trade settlement systems, and securing energy markets. When you understand the past, the future stops being frightening. It becomes predictable. And remember this: the wise prepare quietly, while the unprepared panic for all to see. Tell me in the comments where you see these pressures showing up in your own life and what steps you are taking to prepare. Because awareness is the first advantage. Before you leave, Pause for a moment. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Everything we just covered is not abstract theory. It is already visible in daily life. Higher prices, volatile markets, quiet supply disruptions, financial rules that seem to change without warning. These are not isolated problems. They are signals. Here is the question most people avoid. If this system is under strain, where do you feel it first? At the grocery store, in housing, in energy bills, in savings, or in the growing sense that the future feels less predictable than it once did? I want to hear from you. Not slogans, not politics, real experience. Where do you personally feel this pressure right now? And more importantly, what are you doing about it? Reducing debt, building resilience, learning new skills, diversifying assets, or simply paying closer attention? Scroll down and leave a comment. Not for me, but for the people reading beside you. Shared awareness changes how people prepare. Quiet preparation always beats loud panic. If this perspective helped you see the world differently, share it with someone you trust. These conversations matter. And if you want to stay ahead of what history is signaling next, subscribe and stay close. Because when you understand the past, the future stops being frightening. It becomes predictable. And those who prepare early rarely need to explain themselves later.